Hi, and welcome to A Time to Thrill. It's me, your host, Amy Austin. It is May, rapidly going through the year. Oh my God, yeah, next month it'll be halfway through the year. I'm not sure what I plan to accomplish for 2023, but I guess now is the time to get on the stick. This month, I am bringing you an interview with legal thriller author Pamela Samuels Young. So I invited Pamela to do the podcast because, oddly, except for Melissa F. Miller, I have not had a lot of legal thriller authors on the podcast, mainly probably because I started writing in romance and wrote a lot of them. At the same time, I was writing legal thrillers, but when I was unable to get my first legal thriller published, I did turn to romance, and those were published. And then from there, I thought, well, maybe I'm a romance author solely. And then I found myself back writing legal thrillers, writing them simultaneously, which was hard. And now I'm writing legal thrillers only. For now, you never know. That said, while we were talking during this conversation, one of the things I realized is that I don't know a lot of legal thriller authors of color, Black women who write thrillers or legal thrillers. And I wonder if we're a small group. So that's something I'm actually thinking about. And in the show notes, there will be some links about that. One of the groups that I do belong to is something called Crime Writers of Color. And if you're on my newsletter, I sent out a link to a YouTube video I did in March, maybe. It was just 10 questions for Crime Writers of Color. I think I did the second one on YouTube, but that is the group right now where I know the most writers of color who write crime fiction, not writers of color generally. I know a lot of writers of color who write romance, because I know a lot of romance writers. So this will be, it's a super interesting conversation because Pamela Samuels Young writes about has black protagonists in her books, out fighting crime and dealing with crime. In and around Los Angeles, from the books I've read, and that's super interesting. I have a lot of thoughts about crime in Los Angeles because I don't write about it, and in my head, Los Angeles is glitz and glamour, and New York, anything east of the Mississippi is, I don't know, gritty and crime filled. As far as fiction goes, not as far as life is concerned. So Pamela has written a number of legal thrillers. She is in the process of publishing a book that she has co-written, which is really interesting, and back to traditional publishing. And in addition, one of the things, if you go look her up on Amazon or wherever, she did write a book about called Kinky Coily, about sort of black hair care, which I find fascinating. And we do talk a little bit about this in the podcast. So without further ado, let me introduce you to, let me say this, NAACP Image Award winner, Pamela Samuels Young. Hi, this is Amy Austin, and welcome to A Time to Thrill. This month, I am delighted to have Pamela Samuels Young on the podcast. Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
It is so interesting. Okay, I'm very excited to talk to you for many reasons. But let's start with, well, you're born and raised in California, which I always find fascinating because the only person I know born and raised in California is my own child. So how is it? Let me say this. In terms of crime fiction and grittiness, do you think that California lends itself to that in the same way that we think of it, well, in Chicago, New York, those kinds of places?
Wow, I never thought about that. But I mean, I think there's crime everywhere, even in the hoity-toity areas. I like crime fiction. I like all of the TV shows, and the most interesting ones are the ones where you watch them when they say, "Oh, this has never happened here before," which is which is bull.
Mhm.
Crime happens everywhere. So I don't think California gives me any more leverage to be a crime writer than any other place.
It's just interesting because well, when I watch TV, a lot of the shows take place in New York, Chicago, maybe even Philadelphia. And they always portray these packed cities as being like sort of like the den of crime. And then a lot of shows in California, people are driving, actually, that one shot where people are always driving through Beverly Hills with the palm trees, it's always sunny. And so it has a different sort of portrayal.
I think that's true. I mean, it's the glitz, the glitz of it and the glamour of it. But there are crazy people everywhere. There's selfish people, there are greedy people, and all of that feeds into people who commit crimes. Because I'm not writing about gangs or drug lords or
Mhm.
I'm writing about ordinary people who commit crimes.
So to that end, can I ask you, so most of the writers I know have bounced back and forth between, let's say, full time work and writing. Most have not done it simultaneously, but when you started, you did both simultaneously. So, what led you to take on the task of being a lawyer, which I've had that job and it's more than a full time job. It occupies your brain for a great part of the day, but also do that and choose to write a book?
Because see, I didn't really. Law came first. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Writing came first because I was a TV news writer for several years, and then decided to go to law school. I was in law school during my 30s. I turned 30 my first year of law school. So law school was a delayed career for me. I thought about law earlier on, but was really intimidated by the prospect. And then I kept meeting these lawyers that I didn't think were very bright, and decided that.
Same for writing, but okay. Yeah.
And I like to say I owe my writing career to John Grisham because my stress relief during as a young associate I worked at O'Melveny and Myers for several years here in LA, was picking up a John Grisham novel, and I enjoyed I enjoyed his thrillers, but I would always finish them and with a dissatisfaction because there were no people in his books who looked like me.
Hmm.
And it was just one day I decided that maybe I could write a legal thriller. And I'd had this really interesting sexual harassment case and said, so maybe I can turn this into a thriller. And got up early one morning, like 4 o'clock in the morning, because you don't have a lot of time. Because when you're a young associate at a large firm, you're almost a slave. But
Right.
so, and when I first sat down to write it, within minutes, I felt like I had discovered my passion. I mean,
Wow.
this was like, okay, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, I enjoy the law, sometimes more than others, but oh my God, sitting there at that desk and like that early in the morning. And so I made that my mission. I'd write before work, after work, in airports. I volunteered for a 6-month assignment in Washington, D.C., just so I'd be away from family and friends and I'd have nothing to do
Mhm.
but work and go home and write. And that's how it all started.
That's fascinating. Okay, let me go back because I have so many questions. I guess the first question is, okay, TV news writing, which is, I interned at TV news when I was in college, and that's a whole, and it was the 80s. Oh my God, I'm so old. No, let's say the early 90s. This is before digital everything. God, I'm dating myself. But what was it? What drew you to TV news? Because I always found TV news to be quite fascinating. But when I interned and we went out on all these, went out to do these stories, I don't know how I felt about it. I interviewed a lot of senators. That seemed to be the thing at the time. But I don't know how I felt about it as a job. But what made you decide to do TV news?
Okay, and I was a news writer and associate producer, so I was never on the street. I was the one. So,
Right.
and it was just sort of a fluke that I wanted to be a journalist, but I envisioned myself as a newspaper
Hmm.
reporter. And in high school, college, editor of newspapers, and in both high school and college, and even did some writing when I was in junior high school and so it was always newspaper. And then I did this semester when went to undergrad at USC, and I did this semester in Washington D.C. and I was supposed to intern for the LA office of the Los Angeles Times, or the DC office of the Los Angeles Times.
Okay.
And when I got there, it fell through, and they put me at the WJLA, which is I think the ABC station there in DC, and again followed another passion. But I finished that semester and came back and said, no more newspapers. I want to be in TV. And
Wow.
that's where it all began. And then I went directly from USC. I did the 1 year master's program at Northwestern at Medill School of Journalism. And from there, got my first job at WXYZ TV in Detroit um, as a production assistant, but I was promoted to writer like in 3 months. And
Hmm.
um, I say the combination of my being a news writer and a lawyer was the perfect opportunity to write commercial fiction. I mean, I write very fast. I mean, I see the story. I know how to punch it up. I know how to, in if I'm given a story and the producer says he wants it in 30 seconds, I got to boil it down and give it to the reader the listener, the viewer in a spicy way. So that was like really great training. And also the news writing was before law school. So it was great training for law school because I could write very fast. And so exams, I feel like I had an edge. I mean, I typed the bar exam on an electric typewriter if we're dating ourselves. So
Oh, I did. I had one too. I had to carry it around. I had a portable one. Good grief.
yeah,
Okay. Uh, did you enjoy the TV news? Because one of the things that I found interesting, I guess, when I was interning was the moving around to move up. So people would move to like this small station and that small station. And, when I was interning, it was in Boston, but it was like they would move from, oh, I'd been in Springfield and now I'm in Boston. Then I'm going to go to DC. Or they were always constantly moving to move markets, which seemed, it was the same with radio. It seemed not such a lonely existence, but a little itinerant in the beginning.
that was definitely the requirement if I had wanted to move up to be a producer and to go that route. And I didn't have, you know, I you know, I was an associate producer, meaning I'm the right hand of the producer. That's only a couple times that I produced. I produced like the early morning 5 minute segment, and I
Mhm.
was not very good at it. I was not, and the times when I was able to filled in for the longer segments, I was not good at it because the pressure of the anchors are they're talking over, then you got to figure out what else you're going to cut because you only got a half an hour and you got to be out and hit those commercial breaks, and it was just very stressful for me. But I liked writing. I liked writing the intros for the anchors. I liked writing for the reporters. The writing part was fine, but the producing part, the stress of being a television news producer, it wasn't for me. And after about, I think it was 6 7 years of TV news, that's when I decided to go to law school. And I had a real bad day in the newsroom, and I thought about law school for a long time and just never did anything about it. And I had like a bad day. The tape didn't come up. A producer yelled at me, and it's just like a bad day. And that's when the day I said, I'm going to law school. And I picked up the phone and I found out what I needed to do. There was no you couldn't go online. There was no online. This was 1986.
Right.
Yeah, my first year of law school was 87. So, and I had 3 weeks to go get a bar LSAT study guide and study for the bar LSAT, and from there I went to UC Berkeley and never looked back.
So did you, okay, I have so many questions. And you were an associate. I was never a law associate at a big firm. My ex-husband was, so I did. I lived with that, and many of my friends were. How did you like that grind, or did you like that grind? Or I mean, for most people, I know it was a means to an end. They either became partner, or they were going to go somewhere else in house, or pay off their loans, as it were, when I left. So it was always a means to an end, but it's a long slog to get to that next level. How did you manage oh my God, the sheer amount of hours that you have to work.
Yeah, it was. I think it's. Well, looking back on it, there were times when I enjoyed it. There were times when it was too much. I mean, I was in the employment group. I practiced employment law. So I mean, there were cases that I had that were just very interesting: sexual harassment, discrimination, etc. And I loved the part of getting a new case, interviewing the client, digging into the facts, trying to build a defense. Did my client really do this, or did my client didn't do this? This is a case we
Mhm.
have to settle. So that whole thing, I enjoyed that, and I kind of, now that I'm not practicing anymore, I kind of miss part of it. But just like with law, just like with the TV news, after a while there's a little burnout, and then there was burnout with the long hours in the law firm and all of that. So I transitioned from a large law firm to in-house, which first went to Raytheon Company for I think a year, and then I went to Toyota for the last 15 years of my career. And it was, being an in-house lawyer, I think, is the best legal job out there. I really enjoyed the people I worked with. I enjoyed the cases. It was rarely stressful. So a lot, that's not true for all companies, but Toyota was a really unique company, and I would do it all again. And I
Yeah. So
and yeah.
did you work in Torrance then? I had to think
Yes,
about
I worked
that.
in,
Okay.
yeah, worked in Torrance for all my 15 years.
And how I did in-house, but very, very briefly, as I've done all things. I have a short span. I didn't mind it. I will say that I didn't mind it. It was low stress. It was low key. I did real estate in-house. It was very low stress. Um, and I didn't mind actually, and that's when I started writing. So I could do both at the same time. I think if I had been an associate, I would not at a firm. I would not have had the time. So did you write? So when you were getting up early, that's when you were doing the in-house work.
No, I was getting up early at a Melvin E. Meyer.
Oh my God, that's right. You did say that. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
That's
Toyota was a very supportive environment to be a writer. It was amazing because we had every other Friday off because they had a 980 schedule. So that
mhm,
I just had a very supportive management team. The day my um, first book was released, I took the day off to celebrate, right? And my secretary calls me and says, "We just had a department meeting, and the general counsel put your website up on the screen and told everybody about your book."
that's cool.
When I won the Image Award, another general counsel, called PR and said, "You need to do an article on her in the company newsletter." I mean, it was just a very supportive environment. And then when I was overwhelmed at some point, writing and working, um, it was my boss who suggested I go part time when I said I wanted to quit. I was like, "I can't. Is that an option?" I never thought to ask to cut from to go to 3 days a week or 2.5 days a week or whatever it was. They offered me that. So, and I tell people that when you have a passion and you have a day job, make sure you do your day job well,
Right.
because had I been blowing off the law stuff for the writing, they never would have asked me to work part time, because obviously they considered me a valuable asset to the department.
Mhm.
And I never thought to ask to go part time because nobody in the law was working part time in our legal department. So I just look back and say I ended up really in the right place.
You did. That is amazing support. That is amazing. Although
Really.
to be honest, my boss was very kind. He was like, when it's downtime, he's like, you should do something else. And I was like, oh, I like to write. He was like, then you should do that. So I did have a very supportive. Maybe the law is not as bad as I think. I'll have to think about that. But okay, so the first book you wrote, the first book you published.
No, the first
Okay,
book I wrote was the second book I published. The first book about the sexual harassment case, In Firm Pursuit, was the one I got all the rejections on, and but didn't give up, and learned. John Grisham got 45 rejection letters, and people told him nobody wanted to read about lawyers, and he wrote The Firm was his
right.
second book, and so started writing another book. And by that time, I'd taken some writing courses and discovered. Somebody gave me my first James Patterson book, Roses Are Red. A coworker at Toyota said, "Oh, this is somebody I read, and you really like them." And I read Roses Are Red by James Patterson in one day. And I don't read books in one day. I'm just not a real fast reader. And I was like amazed and intrigued about, why did I read this book in one day? And I just went back and looked at it. And it was very short chapters, hook at the beginning, a hook at the end, and there was
Mhm.
always movement forward. And I took those concepts. And I also I took a 1 day writer's course, and the instructor said, take a book that's in your genre and outline it. And I outlined John Grisham's The Firm. And those things about story structure helped me write that second book. And it was a book that got three agents interested in it, and was got my first offer in like 3 or 4 months. So I think you need to go through that first experience, because I just started writing when I first started. I didn't know about any. I didn't know about story structure. I didn't know about voice.
Hmm.
I learned that along the way.
So wait, what did you major in college? I
I
guess
did
it's
broadcasting and undergrad was journalism, and the second and my master's was broadcasting. But I never thought a word about being a novelist. It just never crossed my mind until John. I got tired of reading John Grisham with nobody in the books who looked like me. I wish
this is
I had have gotten a degree in English, and
oh,
that would have changed my whole writing style, because my writing style is commercial. It's just I'm a news writer. I'm short and to the point. I'm not all flowery, and I think that's why that first book I tried to write sucked, because I was trying to be Toni Morrison and describe the shadow on the wall and the mood, and I
ah,
wasn't me. And so when I went back and just wrote the story that I felt as a and not trying to be somebody I wasn't, and I kind of found my voice.
that's fascinating. Okay, that's fascinating. I mean, I was an English major, so I can't speak on it because I have a completely different experience of reading so many different kinds of books, both for school and personally, that I wouldn't say I got a voice early. I don't know. To be frank, I don't think there's any shortcut. I don't think there's any, well, okay, occasionally there are people who write that first thing and it's the thing. But for most of us, I think it's trial and error because we all come to it with, I guess, some preconceived notions of what a novel is, whether it's character driven or plot driven or flowery description or whatever that is. And I think we have to all meet in the middle if you want to sell a commercial book,
Yeah,
and figure out how to do that in our way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's all paths. It's actually quite fascinating when you think about it. So wow. So what's the name of the first book that you sold then?
Every Reasonable Doubt.
Okay. That's one I see all the time. When I look on the bestseller free list, I'm always seeing where I am and where everybody else is, depending on the day. Um, but what was it about that story that hooked you or hooked readers or hooked agents? What do you think it is about that was the hook?
Um, One, I mastered story structure. I think I just got it. I understood that you need to move it forward. I remember having a writing coach early on, and she would say, "Well, this doesn't move the book forward," and I didn't really understand that.
Hmm.
And she had said to me, "If you take this chapter out, do you still have a book?"
Oh,
And that would have registered more with me. It's weird how my brain works, but I get it now that um, and I had a lot of superfluous nonsense in uh, the version of my first book.
hmm.
I just didn't tell the story. I did the structure. To me, it was structure. I think the story in the first book was just as second book that well, the first book that I wrote that didn't sell initially was just as good, but I just didn't know how to structure it. And I
Right,
think that's what happens with a lot of new beginning writers. You have to master story structure, and one way to do that I found was just to really study other books you like, not just
right,
read them, but study how the story came together. And that experience of outlining the firm. I mean, I still have that outline. I was in my files here, and just Mitch meets with the partners, and the partners want him to come to Memphis. It's just a couple lines, and then I went through each chapter, and it was somewhere in that process there was a light bulb moment about how that story was told. I have
hmm,
a lot of friends in the movie. I shouldn't a lot, but I know 3 or 4 of my close friends are in the film, movie, TV business,
right.
and their stuff is really structured. There's a structure for a movie. There's a structure for a sitcom or a
True.
drama. And I later learned that there is a structure for a novel, just a little less, not as structured, but it's there. Some things you have to do to engage the reader, and it took me some time to learn that.
Although I will say this, I do think that the beauty of novel writing is that there's a little more play than there is in like an hour TV drama or a half hour sitcom. Those are very, very, very strictly structured.
Yeah,
And it's very, because I know people who write, obviously, and it's very interesting how strict it is and how they have to. It's actually very interesting because they have to like, how can I say this, wedge their creativity into that structure. And the best shows are where the creativity meets the structure.
Yeah.
But it's not easy. It's not easy.
A friend of
Um,
mine convinced me to sign up for a course on writing a TV drama at UCLA, and I quit after the first day because I felt like I was being stuffed into a box. And she was like, "Don't quit, no, let's do it." And I hated it. I hated it, and I was like, "Nope, I'll stay with novels."
I will say this though, because I know many people who do this. In some ways, it's similar because if you watch, like, especially with, not necessarily not ones that are written for streaming because they don't have the commercial break, but for those written for network, they do have to have that hook going out to the commercial and the hook coming back in from the commercial.
Right.
And that to me is very fascinating. Streaming has different issues because there are no commercials, but which allows people more room. But then a lot of people do complain that stories drag. But it's very fascinating, the idea of structure, because I think what my perception of creative people is that we would all like to have far less structure, but structure is necessary because it's a reader consumer expectation.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, it's always that. So let me turn to, so I read, this is many years, I read Every Reasonable Doubt, but this is not the most recent. But the other book, what is the title of your book on sex trafficking? I don't have my Kindle open.
Anybody's daughter.
That's right. So what, this is such a change of topic, but what possessed you to write that book?
I was having lunch with a friend, and he was saying that girls were being trafficked in South LA. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This was, no, maybe 210 to 11. And I'm like, I said, no. I mean, in my mind at that point, that happens in, I don't know, Russia, the Philippines, other places. It didn't happen here. And he says, no, no, I'm telling you, the gangs, they're trafficking girls, blah, blah, blah. And I left that lunch and started looking online, and there was, and I'm like, why isn't anybody talking about this? And it's just amazing to me. And that story just came to me. I just, it, it was, it just came to me. I wish I could do that again.
we all have we all have a magical book.
The other two were work. The rest were work, but that and Failure to Protect, those two stories just came to me.
It's so funny because every author I know has a magical book. I have one, and I wish they were all like that. But unfortunately, doesn't work that way. At least for me. Maybe there's some person for whom all the books are magical. I would like to meet
I
them.
wish.
But what? So what was? Let me ask you this: what was the reader reaction to that?
It was very good. It was very. People were surprised.
Hmm.
I still do. I'm talking about trap. That's the book that keeps on giving. I mean, I'm doing next week. I'm doing a panel discussion on trafficking. Next month for the LA County Department of Health, I'm doing a panel on trafficking. So it turned me into an anti-trafficking advocate, and I'm always asked to talk about it and provide books. And so it's still an issue. I think COVID sort of pushed it to the forefront. I mean, I was doing a lot more talking about it then, and I've seen changes. When I first started, those a minor picked up for trafficking was going to go to jail. Today,
Right.
today she's a victim. She's not. I mean, anybody under 18 is not. They're not treated that way. And I
Yeah.
tell people that there's no such thing as a child prostitute. They are sexually exploited children. Period.
Oh,
And
this is, yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
we, we look at those girls out there and who are walking the tracks or wherever we see them, and we think, oh well, they want to do that, and then no, 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 no. And I think you got to look at what brought them there, and it could be a number of things. Most adult women who are in the sex in this quote unquote sex industry, I don't like that word, um, were abused as children. I mean, we need to look behind the screen and have some compassion because it's a problem.
No, I'm thinking about, well, I'm thinking about two things because I have friends who did advocacy around sex trafficking with the California legislature. I want to say, oh my God, maybe 15 years ago. It's a bit back, but it was different. I think here and in New York, because New York was very heavily, especially in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, into prosecuting children
Yep.
for children, girls, young girls mainly, for sex crimes. And it was super, I don't want to say interesting. It was, I don't know if the word ironic is right, but often the girls, like 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, had greater sentences and greater punishment than the men who sought them out.
Yep. Isn't that
And they would
nuts?
It was, and I can't unsee this. I once saw something about this, and they had these men. They would sit in these. They were prosecuted for misdemeanors, and I don't know if that's changed primarily. And they would have these room. It was like the 1 day traffic court sort of thing, where they would sit in
They
these
have
rooms.
John schools. I mean, I
Right.
can't. I'm stunned that they have John schools. I mean,
Yes.
what is that?
I don't know. I actually saw a video of one once, and I don't have any words for that. So, because I just really don't. But they would, it was like a slap on the wrist, and it was, I don't want to say it was like a wink and a nudge because it was not quite that, but it felt like that while they're telling the other side of the story that these girls were awful and they should be put in jail and all these, things, the more punishment aspects of our society applying to minors who, especially when you hear their stories, are not necessarily voluntarily there. I don't know the number of 13-year-olds that get up and go, this is the thing that's going to be. It's always, well, coercion, persuasion,
Yep.
sometimes, just
Yep.
that kind of thing. And I wish, well, I have a lot of wishes, but when you're talking to people about it, are they, how can I say this? Do they support the idea that children are being exploited? Because it's always, it's children versus like the punitive nature of our society to punish people for crimes.
I think they do because usually I'm lucky enough to have often speak with um, a victim. And when a
Mhm.
victim tells her story, you get it.
Right.
You get how they ended up there. I mean, one, I'm speaking on a panel next month with somebody who was a runaway from home because she was being abused by a family
Mhm.
member, and her mother didn't believe her, and she ran away. She met this guy who said, "Oh, it's raining. Get in the car with me." And then, then she's groomed for a few months, and then she's out on the street. I mean, today she's a anti-trafficking advocate, helping save others. But you have to understand how this happens. And we're think about the situation where we've seen the situation where a teacher dates a student. Let's
Right.
like she says she's 16 and she's like, "I love my teacher. Or I'm going to run away with him," and blah blah blah. When that and she's in love with that teacher, as many of these girls think they're in love with their pimps.
Mhm.
And when that situation is caught, that teacher goes to jail, loses his job, and that girl gets help. But in the
Right.
situation where a girl is picked up for trafficking, that girl is vilified. I mean, it's changing.
Mhm.
It's changing, and that pimp used to get a slap on the wrist.
Mhm.
There's more attention to it now, and there's stiffer penalties, and some guys are even getting life in prison. I mean, they're few, but it's happening. So, but it's not stemming the tide. I interviewed a pimp once, a young guy. He wouldn't interview me with me in person, but through my connections, he agreed to talk to me on the phone. He was 24 years old, two
Mhm.
parent home. Said he did it for money. Said he's gonna trying to save enough money to open a bar. Said that you will never stop it because my clients are doctors and lawyers and judges and cops, and the girls will tell you that as well.
Mhm.
And until we start punishing the buyer, I don't think you are going to stop it. You got to punish the buyer like we punish the pimp, and we're not ready to do that because many of the people who are buying sex are judges, lawyers, doctors, and politicians. So
Right. No, it's interesting because one of the things I talked about, not talked about, when I was writing books on trafficking, there's two. One of the things that the pimp in the book talks about is that it's a way to make money, and the repercussions are not nearly as dire as if he were trafficking in coke or large
Ex-
quantities of marijuana and all of that. With
Exactly.
all the life sentences and enhancements and federal sentencing guidelines that come along with that are far more onerous than sex being a pimp or a trafficker.
Right, right. And then and there's also the issue of the girls may be afraid to testify against them,
Right.
or may think they're in love and they don't want to testify against them. And then so it's a hard crime to prosecute, but there are people out there who are trying.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know. I spend a lot of time thinking about whether or not that will shift, but I don't know where we are now politically. That doesn't seem to be at the forefront. But you were saying it came out more during COVID. Was there more attention to that then?
No, I think there was less attention.
Oh, okay.
When
Okay.
COVID hit and nobody cared about that. We were all consumed with COVID, but people were still out there buying sex.
I hadn't
Believe
thought
it or
about
not.
it.
Believe it or not.
I'm thinking I was at home because I
Mhm.
was, but other people were not. Okay, I'm gonna put that one in my head because I hadn't thought about the things that you couldn't. So for people who have compulsions or whatever, their desires are greater than their worry about COVID. I guess they continued on. Huh. I- okay, okay, I'll have to think about that. So I have a question. A few months ago, I'm not so good with time. There was a reading of one of your books. Um,
Yeah, that was
at a
really cool.
theater near here, and I really wanted to go, but I was at a different theater. I was at the Geffen, which is far on the west side, and driving back is not perfect. But the theater that you were at is actually really close to where I live. How did that come about? And what was the book they did the reading of?
They did anybody. No, they did Failure to Protect, and a few years ago they did Anybody's Daughter. It's
Oh,
the oh God, I'm the Town Street Theater Group.
mhm.
And actually, my first book, Anybody's Daughter, was the first book that they did a stage reading of. And it was so cool to see the characters come alive like that. And they just, I don't know, called me up and said, we'd like to use your book to start our stage reading series. And then a few years later, they did Failure to Protect.
So it was a cold call.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I mean, the phone rings 90% of the time. It's somebody trying to sell me something. So I'm just always that would be a heck of a call. What did
Well, I
you?
think it was a cold email. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I think like somebody emailed me about it. I mean, through my website. Yeah.
that's fascinating. How was the one I missed? The one a few months ago. So how seeing the characters come to life is interesting, but how did they do the reading? Because books are not plays, even if they're dialogue heavy. So how did they do that adaptation
They did.
to?
They did most of the. They did dialogue, right?
Okay,
And then there was also a narrator who might read things, but they did a great job of communicating the story because people in the audience who hadn't read the book, they got it,
wow.
And it was really, yeah, it was a really cool experience.
And you've done it twice. So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I want to check my email now. Maybe magic will come that way. What? And then okay. So the
You know,
other thing is,
think about that. Let me go back because I've done so many book clubs. I
mhm,
think one of the book club members had a connection to Town Street, so I think she brought the book to them. So I
okay.
mean, yeah, I think that was how. Yeah,
It's just it's fascinating because it I've seen a lot of stage readings, but they're usually not adaptations of books. So they're usually actually plays in development, to be frank. So that's the last one I saw, maybe last year. But it's interesting. It's a very interesting idea, and now that I think about it, I wish it happened more often because I think I like novels and I like story structure of novels, and I also love plays. But I think that the merger of the two was probably a very good idea.
and
Um,
so you reminded me of something because there's also when I did one of my books. I can't remember which one. Maybe it was lawful. I think it was lawful deception. For my book signing for my release party, I had like 5 or 6 of the actors acted out at my book release party, and that was really cool. And I think I'd made a donation to the theater, and they agreed to do that for me. So I'm
that is
I'm going to do that again too.
That's Okay, that is fascinating because I've never seen such a thing. I mean, I've seen authors, many, many times read passages from their book, or people talk about their careers, separately, but not a reading. That is actually a really, really interesting idea,
Yeah.
especially in LA. It would be much more feasible than other places. That's okay. I'm you all sorts of things I have never thought about nor seen, but that's a really great idea. Okay, so how did the NAACP Image Award come about? Because that's a huge deal
It's
for
so funny
literature.
because I was just talking to my then publicist was Ella Curry, and I was just talking and I was just talking to her yesterday. We when she read the advance copy of Anybody's Daughter, because that was a self-published book, right?
Hmm.
And she's like, "You should submit this for the Image Award." And I'm like, I don't think so, because then
Hmm.
I went looked at the prior winners, and they were all published. I mean, all traditional publishers, and I didn't do it. And then
Hmm.
she called me later. She's like, "The deadline's coming up. You need to submit the book." And she was like, really, really quickly. And I was like, "Well, it's like I'm not going to win. It's self-published." She's like, "I don't care. Submit it." And then then the nominations came out, and I was up against Walter Mosley,
Oh, Jesus.
uh, Terry McMillan, Sister Soldier, and Victoria Christopher Murray, who were all traditionally published. I'm like, well, I don't have a chance. It's nice to be nominated. And then when I won, it was like, wow. And my boyfriend's always telling me that I don't dream big enough, or I don't, you know, and and I always thank Ella that had she not pushed me, I would have never submitted the book in the first place,
Hmm.
because I thought that and this was 2013, because self publishing was still kind of I still mumbled under my breath that I was self published because when it
Yeah,
was, my first two were traditionally published, and my third book couldn't was turned down by 8 publishing houses. We had that many back then,
right.
and I was like, I was embarrassed about being self-published, and I'm not anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So what made you, well, I'll ask you about the Image Award in a second, but what made you make the leap to self-publishing? Because, well, many people have many different reasons for why they did it, but what was yours?
I was my third book didn't get picked up by the current publisher, and then I got a new agent, which was a really big publishing house. I mean, that publishing house at the time represented Sue Grafton. I was like, okay, this is it. This is my big hit. He couldn't
Right.
sell it. And he wanted me to put Murder on a Down Low on the shelf and write something else. And I thought to myself, no, this is a good book. I'm going to self publish it. And I read about everything I needed to do. And there was no Kindle Direct Publishing back then. This was go to a company and have them print up
Uh,
500 and send it to your house, and there was no on demand, and so this was 2007, 6 or 7,
wow.
and but I believed in the book, and some great things happened from that book that confirmed that, because the independent publishers group gave it picked it up and gave me a distribution deal. So it was actually in a few stores. A friend of mine down called me from Chicago, called me excited. I seen your book in the store for 2007. That was a big deal to be in a store as a self-published author.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and here I live in LA, and in Marina Del Rey, the Barnes and Noble. I had walked in there, and it was on the shelf and up front as a staff pick. And
Wow.
I was like, this is amazing, from a book that the agents had put on the shelf. And so from then on, I didn't look back. And over the years, I wanted to return to traditional publishing. As a matter of fact, um, a publishing house reached out to me, saying
Hmm.
right before anybody's daughter came out and said, have anything interesting? What are you working on? I sent them Anybody's Daughter, and their offer was so pitifully low. I said,
Hmm.
hell no. And it was amazing, because the month after I won the Image Award, I made what their advance was that month.
Hmm.
So, and I have not looked back from there. So,
No, I think, well, many of us have a similar story. I think I remember my first The royalties I got on the first day from Amazon exceeded my previous 6 months. You know, you got the royalty statement 6 months in 6 months in arrears, and it exceeded that. And I thought, oh, well, this is different. I was just like, oh, this is different. It was an interesting, well, money talks, and it's very interesting. I don't know. Well, traditional publishing, it's its own thing now, and we could have. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. What? So after winning what was it like winning the Image Award? Because that's I don't. You
It,
know, most people. Let me say this. Maybe Terry McMillan would have expected it. Maybe I don't know. But did it feel hugely unexpected?
oh, it did. It did to me. And it opened a lot of doors. I mean, it
Mhm.
opened a lot of doors and it gave me some confidence to keep going and I was doing the right thing and that I could take charge of my own career. And that was the
Mhm.
biggest gift it gave me. Because I have not been self published since then. I do have a book coming out that I co wrote with Dwayne Alexander Smith. It'll be out next June, I hope. That we
Mhm.
wrote a detective series, but because he was represented, and we were with against Simon and Schuster,
Mhm.
Atreus. And so I'll be back in traditional publishing with that book, but I also have something out later this year. I hope under my
Mhm.
own name. So we'll see. I plan to do both. So we'll see.
No, a lot of people are hybrid. I mean, I mean, it it can really work as long as the deadlines don't clash. That's actually the biggest problem most people I know have, or they have a deal that doesn't allow them to publish as often as they might like. But those are contractual issues and timing
Yeah,
issues.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so since so did you? What was it like? I don't want to say quitting, but leaving the law to write. Was it a hard decision?
No, I couldn't wait. But looking back, I think I would have probably written more if I still had a job because I wrote, I see, I don't know, 9, 10 books, might be more than that while I was working. And so I've only published two. I left in 2016 and I had
Mm,
one, I did one, um, I did Failure to Protect, so I did. I went, and what I'm saying is, I haven't written as much now that I, now that I'm a full time writer. But COVID was part of that because my last book came out at 219, and then
right.
COVID hit, so I didn't get any publicity or do any hit the road at all in 220, and here we are, 223. So, but I took the first year off. The first year, I was struggling to write, and it was funny. My minister said, just give yourself a break. You've been doing. I've been working since I was 16 in some job or another. I've never had
Right.
more. I had a month off. You think about all the things you do, a month where you don't have to do anything. So I did. I took a year off and then started dabbling again. But I don't write with I have not written with that kind of urgency since I became full time because when you don't have time you use the time you have effectively. But
Right.
I've been reading the Miracle Mornings and
Ah,
I'm
yes.
doing that
Hal
practice.
Elrod, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and this is what day 16 for me, and it's amazing about the mindset and the intention and the affirmations and the visualization. I think there might be something to this. I mean, I'm enjoying. I get up at 5:30 and I'm excited to begin my morning that way, and it's really cool.
That's fascinating. There are a lot of people. What is the Hal Elrod book, and then also I think Mel Robbins. They spend a lot of time talking about the how can I say this? Your choices and establishment morning routine can affect your entire day.
It's so,
I
so true.
I don't know. I don't have a routine, but I'm not that person. But I managed to write books despite having zero routine. Uh, every day is a grab bag in my life. What so given that, what are your future writing plans? Like how do you see your career developing going forward? Do you want to do more co-writing? Do you want to do more traditional publishing? Do you want to remain hybrid? How do you see the shape of your career future, I guess?
I like the co-writing thing with Dwayne, and we envision it as a series. our final edits are due from my editor are due April 1st. So I'm going to then turn back to the book that I was working on by myself. And I'd like to get back to producing at least a book a year. And I got people shopping a couple of books for movie stuff, and we'll see what that turns out, and just go from there.
Okay. How can I ask you about this? How did you like co-writing? People, let me say this. I have a friend who actually primarily co-writes, and she's co-written with different people, and sometimes it works well, but sometimes it doesn't. I've known people who write, they each write different chapters, they each write different characters. One writes and then the other corrects. How did you find co-writing? Because I find it so very solitary and it's all in my head that I don't know how I would share that with another person.
Yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. One, our writing styles are the same, so that made it easy. I think he called me and said, "I got a great idea. We should write it together." And when I heard the idea, I was like, "That is a great idea. I'm in." And
Mhm.
he did the primary outline, right? And
Right.
then I fit into it. And then so he would write a chapter, send it to me. I would feed off of it, still based on the outline, and send it back. And we went back and forth. And it didn't take us very long. I would think if you, you know, not counting the gaps in between when we weren't writing, we probably did that book in 3 or 4 months. Because again, our writing styles are the same. We're short, quick, commercial fiction, drive the book along, and I'm really excited about what's going to happen with it. And I hope the publisher gives it a good push, because I think it'll be something readers will like.
That is fascinating, the idea. So do you okay, let me ask you this because I don't do this either. Have you plotted your books? Are you a plotter?
I am definitely a plotter. I am an outliner from beginning to end. I can
Wow.
I
Okay.
cannot just free form, and I've tried. It's a waste of time.
I only freeform. I actually I don't. The idea of an outline makes my head hurt. Like I just couldn't plan. I don't have an outline for my life, much less a book. What? I can't even. So you know what's going to happen at the end of the book when you start.
Yes, sometimes that changes, but I know where it's going. And sometimes if I'm struggling with the end, I'll just forget about it and just write, and it'll come somewhere in the end. It comes.
Do you let well? Okay, so you have tried the tried pantsing, and so you found.
My first book was a pantser, but I didn't know what I was doing. So so
Wow. So how did you let me say this because one of the things that one of my talk to writers we spend a lot of time talking about is how we came to the process we have now. Would you say it was difficult or did you figure out your writing process fairly early on?
when after that first book, and then
Mhm.
when that instructor said, "Take a book that's like yours and outline it," and then when I studied how James Patterson's books come together, I said I need an outline, and that's when I outlined Every Reasonable Doubt. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. So you okay, you learned quickly. I did not learn so quickly. Um, that's so interesting because I think well, I don't know everybody's first book. I had a writing instructor who was not a I don't know what you'd call her structure. She just wrote all the different parts of the book and then would sit down and put all the pages on her floor and then try to arrange them into a book. And that was her suggestion. I think I may be still mad about that to this day. I think my head almost exploded at the idea of doing that, and I'll never do that again, ever. But it was, I'm a disorganized thinker, and I know that, but that was way more disorganized than even I think. So I just start at the beginning of the book and right to the end,
Mm-hmm.
while figuring out as I go along. What is your writing life like? I mean, do you write every day? Do you have a certain word count? How is it that you structure it?
I try to. I don't write every day. I did last year. I did a panel with Michael Connolly, and he said he writes every day, even on vacations, every day. And I was like, I got to go home and try to write every day. And it does not work for me. So, but I like long writing stretches. Um, there's sometimes when I want to write 5,000 words. If I can do 5,000 words, I'll feel like I accomplished something. And doing NaNoWriMo, I that was my goal, and I did
Mhm.
accomplish it. And but I I know the day before that I'm going to get up early to write. I mean, I'm thinking about it, And I had a long slump. Like last year, I didn't do much of anything. I just dibbled and dabbled here. I didn't, I was just COVID tired. I have two,
Yeah.
my parents are both 91. Thank God they're still active
Wow.
and stuff. But that requires doctor's appointments, things like that, and hanging out with them. So, but this is a good time for me now because I'm celebrating this month, all month. I'm celebrating my birthday. It's
Mhm.
my 65th birthday,
Mhm.
and I just came back from I rented a 3-bedroom condo on the beach in Carlsbad last week, and I invited 4 of my girlfriends, and we hung out for 5 days and acted like 16-year-olds. I ate everything in sight, and so now I'm back, and I'm celebrating all month. My actual birthday is not until Saturday.
Okay.
I've just got things I'm doing and just sort of mentally preparing to enjoy myself this month and then just get back into it.
Well, I will say happy birthday. March birthdays, man. And actually, I was in Carlsbad in January with a lot of writers, and we did eat everything there too.
Mhm.
Um, and shockingly, the food prices were a lot, even restaurant prices were a lot less than LA. It was fascinating for being so close, but that's a different conversation. What? So it's interesting that you're just thinking about that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a write everyday person and I do write on vacation. So
Wow, I'm
I
jealous.
have a laptop, will travel. My primary goal is finding hotel rooms with a safe that my laptop fits in so I can write and then put it in the safe and then go sightseeing or whatever. But I do take it every single place. Took it to Panama, took it to Denmark, I'll take it anywhere. And write then
I
I can
do
move
like
with
going
my
away. I do like going away to write. I have a timeshare in Palm Springs, and I just like driving down there, spending 3 or 4 days, and just. I used to write pre-COVID in my Panera Bread and my little corner, and I would stay there 4 hours. I would eat two meals, so it's something about getting away. Even though I spent a lot of money painting my office and putting inspirational words on the wall, I do like writing away from home too.
That's it's interesting. I only write it well, other than traveling, I do only write at home, but I find that so I have like an Aeron chair and a very like ergonomic setup and two monitors and all that, and I mostly write anywhere else other than there. It's quite quite interesting. Although I do try to do promotion work there because I think it's better probably to be sitting up and not destroying my body as it ages. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was the one book that you did on natural hair. So, what inspired that?
Just having some challenges with my hair, and then meeting a friend who had gone natural, and just seeing how her hair had grown and how she took pride in her natural hair. And so I finally got up nerve to do the big chop, and I love it. I mean, and I wanted to, even though the book's kind of outdated now, I need to update it. But yes, I'd like to lead more women my age to natural hair because I just think it's just, I love the beauty of my nappy hair, and I wasn't raised to feel that way about it, but I love it now.
So, when you were working, did you? Oh my god, I haven't thought about it because I don't. I've had natural hair for many many years. But did you, I guess, perm, straighten, or do something with your hair
My
when?
early
Yeah.
career, yeah, 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 but in more recent, yeah. Before that, I mean, I would wear braids
Hmm.
a lot, but yeah, I had straight hair. I had weaves before. It's like, no, I have the greatest hair. I love my hair now.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, what I went maybe you were raised so I had, well, perms until I was thir no, until I graduated from college. Maybe law school. I'd have to actually think about it. And then I did the big chop when I wrote an essay that was published about it, I think in the Cleveland Plain Dealer back then. But I cut off my hair and then I had natural hair from the mid 90s on. I haven't had any chemical treatment since then. Um, but it was a lot maintaining it. I think that's the thing I didn't like in my early years. I spent every Saturday at the beauty parlor, and it was like an all day thing. And I think I hit my limit, maybe in my mid 20s. I was like, I can't continue doing this, and I don't miss it at all. I mean, I don't miss it at all.
Yep, yep, yep. I drove a long way I drove to Pasadena to get my hair done. Oh my God. Not anymore.
Do you that it's interesting because I was talking to somebody, we were talking about the Crown Act, I don't know why. And did you find let me ask you this because I wonder about this. Did you find it necessary, do you think, to have straight hair in order to succeed in corporate America?
I didn't. But and that's like the Crown Act is so, I mean, like, why do we even need it? It's just ridiculous.
Mhm,
But we do need it because
mhm,
people make judgments. But I remember when I was interviewing for my job at Toyota, and this would have been 2001, and I had braids. My friend says, "Oh, so you can take your braids out for the interview?" I'm like, "No. My
mhm.
resume doesn't speak for me, then this isn't the place for me." And I didn't. I didn't. And she thought it was like a big deal for me to interview in my braids. That's like I had them sticking 50 minutes. I had them in a bun in the back of my head. What the?
Right.
Like, get over it. So, and
Oh.
it wasn't an issue.
That is interesting because in that time span that you're actually talking about, I had friends. So I was in house back then, and when my friends were looking to move from whatever one in house to another, especially I think this is back then, they were looking to move to tech. So it was eBay, Yahoo, Google, but the early ages of those. Most of my friends would wear a wig to the interview.
It's
Um,
crazy. It's crazy that we even have to think that. Ah, it's so sad.
and then they would so it was always the debate, so they were going to wear a wig for the interview, and then whether or not there was going to be an issue when they showed up with their natural hair for the job. And I will say that some of the tech companies it was an issue and some it wasn't, but it was
Wow.
yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of friends who left, during the second tech boom, I guess, because there was a bust, and then maybe 2004, whatever, they left LA because the tech jobs were up in, the Bay Area. So they left, but there was a lot of flying up wearing wigs, and then whether or not or when to take off the wig when they had the job. But that was a huge consideration. Although when I was in house, I must have had natural hair. I think I probably had a short afro the whole time. And now that you think about it, I never thought about it because I didn't think to change my hair. There were no issues. I guess I got the job and I kept them. I was now I'm thinking about it. I didn't have time to think. Like it just wasn't the thing I was thinking about.
Yep.
I was going to show up, and if they weren't going to hire me, they weren't going to hire me. Maybe that was an issue I hadn't considered. But I never thought about it for myself. I did see other people think about it, but not for myself so much. But I don't think I cared that deeply because I was always like, yeah, but when I get back to writing, so I was sort of thinking about what I was going to do in the future, and I was working to pay off law school loans. To be frank, um, that was my if I could get out of debt, then I could write, and that was my primary focus. I don't think I was thinking much about my hair, but now I'm going to actually call my friends and ask them about it. Now that I just thought about it, so you have your future mapped out. This is interesting. So you know what's coming, and has your writing changed? Do you think during the last more than decade?
I hope I'm better. Um, my writing
Do you
style hasn't changed, I don't think, but
Do you go back and read the old books? I was just talking to somebody about this, and she went back and she
it's
read some book.
painful. Oh, I was like, why did I use that word? I could have written it so much better. Oh, it's a painful experience to read an old book. Oh,
No, it's an interesting experience because I think I had a writing coach who was like, well, because I was talking to her about I had the feelings I had about old books, and I'm not going to go back and rewrite them because I don't have that kind of time or interest, to be honest. But she was saying that if you have followed writers who've written, long time, like Michael Connelly or Elizabeth George or any ton of French, I don't know. If you followed writers that have written for a number of years across a number of books, their books have improved. And she's like, but do you ever go back and judge them for the first books? And I always think, well, no, their books improved over time. And I guess that's an expectation. I don't have a different expectation that their books would be completely consistent over time.
right.
Um, and the improvement is actually for some of them quite welcome because they've expanded the kinds of things they write about. And I find it quite fascinating. But it is sometimes hard to go back and look. But I think we all hope that we're getting better or better at storytelling. I'll say that.
Yep, yep, yep.
So the last question I'll ask you is: do you think there's one theme that comes through all your books?
Hmm. Hmm. I don't know that I definitely haven't intentionally
Mhm.
um, put a theme in. I mean, but I've tried to write about women who I think who are strong. I always want to try to educate the reader about something. I would like you to learn something that you didn't know after reading one of my books. But I don't know that weaved a thread, particular theme through them. I wanted to write the kind of women that I didn't see reading when I started writing that weren't I didn't see them, especially not lawyers. All of my books contain featured
Right.
lawyers. So
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there are, and I'd have to, I don't even know, I read anything. Do you think that there are more women of color or lawyers of color, or at least even Black women in thrillers and crime fiction nowadays than there were before? Because now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I have to think about that.
no, I mean there's a character here and there. I don't know anybody, and maybe I should know. Are there other Black authors writing female series with Black women lawyers? Nobody.
Other than myself, let me think. The answer is yes, but I'd have to think, not off the top of my head. The answer is yes. I think I'll include those in the show notes for sure. But the answer is yes. But are there many? I have a reader who emailed me and she said there are not many. And she,
I know who they are. I mean, you know, s- um, I read lots of stuff. So if after this call, please email me a few names.
okay, well,
I can check them out. Yours as well. Okay, I know yours, but
yes, but my protagonists are not the we're not going to get into it. The protagonist from my first series is a white woman. All the other characters, not all the other characters, most other characters are Black. But she is not. But that has to do with traditional publishing. That's a different conversation. That's why. Because people said, eh, my agent and publisher said that they would not read a woman of color as the protagonist. So there we are.
oh,
Uh,
that just hurts my heart. Oh,
yeah,
oh,
I don't have anything to say about that. That's what I was told, and
so
whether or not that's true is a different thing.
it's so sucky. Oh,
But
the
that's
world we live in. It is what it is.
it is what it is. I don't have anything to say that, but I have changed. So the protagonist for my new series my spinoff series is a Black woman, as will be another if I do another spinoff, which is a thing I'm thinking about. There's nothing in the works, but that was also the case. I also wrote romance for years, and that was the case with the books I wrote then, and it was true. I mean, they were not publishing people of color except in very limited groups and limited quantities, and so we could not enter the main lines of romance. And that has changed, but only I remember when it changed. I don't know, maybe I don't want to say 10 years ago, 2006, 7, 8. And it was a big hullabaloo. And they're like, look, we have one Black author in this line. Look what we've done. And we can't all be the one. So um,
Oh, 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 so
it was
sad.
it was very I remember it. I remember the room. I was standing in the room. It was in, I think, a ballroom in San Francisco or Anaheim or LA. It was California somewhere. And I was like, so, and they're like, yeah, just the one. And I was like, okay.
Oh, that's so sad.
No, and interestingly, a lot of publishers are seeking out the same people they turned away, but a lot of those people turn to self-publishing and are making far more money than the publishers can offer. It's very interesting.
Yep,
It's
yep, yep.
it's it's an interesting, I guess, turnabout is fair play sort of moment. But we shall see. We shall see. We shall see. I do wonder about that because I know a lot of Black women lawyers, but there are not a lot of them in fiction. I still think, and I read a lot of crime fiction, and the protagonists are still mostly white males, and then sometimes women detectives or women lawyers, but on the other hand, not many. Okay, now I'm going to think about that because I only think about my own writing in my own lane. And I don't know if I think about the bigger world because I get up every day and I think about writing a book. I don't necessarily always think about the industry as a whole or
Mhm.
publishing as a whole or the
Right,
canon as a
right.
whole. But it's certainly something I will think about. So thank you so, so very much for talking to me. And I will say that the Anybody's Daughter book I found compelling. I'll say that. I don't know. It's a good book. It's not a topic that's great. It's not a great topic, but it's quite compelling because I do wish there were more focus on the things that happen in those, especially with women who think the guy is their boyfriend or think the person loves them. And
Mhm.
it's fascinating to me because those power dynamics go on in like a lot of relationships, but in those instances, it goes badly. But we don't spend a lot of time talking about those particular power dynamics, and I wish there were more conversations about them.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's one of my favorites. Please tell your listeners, if you're listening, do look for "Sounds Like a Plan," which is a book that I wrote with Dwayne Alexander Smith. I see that on a TV screen, and I I have something in my heart that says that's going to happen. It's about two male and female detectives who are kind of like they don't get along. They don't work. They find out they're on the same case, and a lot goes on. I need a better elevator speech for it.
Yeah, I'm sure in time it'll work out, but
Sounds like a plan.
I always hope for the amplification of the big screen, because not only does it sell a lot of books, but it reaches a lot of people who otherwise don't read.
Yep.
And I always think especially for books, actually, I always think it's a good thing. But with that, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. And I always wish good writing.
Thank you, and same to you.
This has been A Time to Thrill with me, your host, Aime Austin. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you'll share, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It will help others to find and enjoy my conversations with brilliant women creators. Also, please hit the subscribe button on your podcast app. In addition to hosting this podcast, I am also the author of the Nicole Long series of legal thrillers. The first 3 books in the Nicole Long series are now live. You can download Outcry Witness, Major Crimes, and Without Consent to your e-reader right now. The 4th book in the new series, The Murders Began, is available for pre-order wherever you get your books. I am also the author of the Casey Quit series of legal thrillers. These titles are available wherever books are sold, your local library, and also an audiobook. You can also find this podcast on Facebook at A Time to Thrill. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with you soon with more great conversation.